When I was 8 years old, my family moved into a new house. I wasn't thrilled about the idea because I had to start second grade, knowing no one. I was an anxious kid, and this did not bode well with me. But my parents were happy, so I learned to cope. I was stuck with one of the smallest bedrooms on the second floor. The ceilings were heavily slanted, and I sadly positioned my bed beneath one, so when I sat up I would slam my forehead straight into the ceiling. To make up for throwing me in the smallest room, my parents painted the room pink, as at the time it was my favorite color. Yet, that didn't make up for the fact that from day one I knew something was wrong with the house. I couldn't pinpoint why I felt this way, but I just knew something was wrong, like something was off, weird, foreign, alien. There were moments we just could not explain, footsteps when no one was awake, cold spots in the weirdest areas, and the invisible eyes that watched you. I always had this feeling, especially in the stairwell to the main floor, that someone was watching me. I would get to the first step and fear would slam into me like a truck. My heartbeat raced, my hair stood on end, and my hands shook as if I had just come in from a cold winter's day. Then I would bolt down the stairs because walking felt like a chore. I just had the feeling I had to get away. My fight-or-flight reflex kicked into overdrive. But there was no reason to be afraid. There was nothing there, and yet I felt like someone was staring into my soul. At first, I thought it was just me feeling this way, but my brother and even my father said they felt the same, like someone was staring at them from the top of the stairs, waiting for them to go down, watching their every move. I ignored these weird happenings as my mind messing with me. A coincidence that my father and brother felt the same thing I did. It was a new house. Maybe we just needed to get used to it. So, I tried to ignore the feeling and pretend that my heart didn't race every time I went down the stairs. That worked for a while, until I saw him. On one rainy night, when I was merely 10 years old, I decided to go to bed early, as I was tired from the day's events. That night, I fell asleep, and awoke a few hours later with intense fear at the sound of a large bang. Initially, I thought I had a nightmare, or that the thunder had spooked me, but there was more. I took a moment to breathe as lightning lit up my room to reveal a man at the end of my bed. He was standing in the stiffest posture someone could manage, wearing jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a plaid to go over top. On his head, he had a baseball cap to cover up his brown hair. I don't remember much of his face, aside from his piercing, unblinking eyes. He just looked at me. He didn't speak, breathe, blink, or move. All he did was stare, a blank expression plastered across his features. Yet his eyes had interest in them, like he was examining me from where he stood. I was frozen with fear, not knowing what to do next. He was standing in the way of the door. If I wanted to get out, I would have to walk through him, and at this point, I was having a hard time remembering to breathe. So, in my kid mind, I decided hiding underneath my blanket would save me. I quickly hid beneath the blanket and squeezed my eyes shut, trying to stay calm. I could still feel his piercing eyes, but I wasn't going to remove the blanket in fear he would be closer. I stayed beneath the blanket until I eventually fell asleep, waking up in the morning to find him gone. I asked my dad if he had come into my room, as my dad dressed similarly to the man I saw, but he shook his head. My dad claimed that he never came up the stairs. Part of me prayed he had, because then I could explain it away without going straight to the fact I saw a ghost. When he said it wasn't him, he asked why. I told him and my mother what I saw, and they said it was just my imagination, as they always had in the past. I tried to confide in my brother, but he was also on their side. He tried to explain it away, make sense of it, but I knew deep down he knew something was off. Nowhere else had I ever felt the need to run down the stairs to get away from something invisible watching me. Maybe it was my nerves, but then why did my brother and father feel it too? I tried to reason with them, but nothing I said convinced them of what I saw. That is, until my brother saw him too. My brother had awoken one night abruptly. He grabbed his water cup from the nightstand and took a swig of water. When he lowered the glass from his face, he almost dropped it onto the floor. When the cup rose to his lips, the doorway was empty. When he lowered the cup, a man was standing in that once empty space. He whispered, "Dad," but there was no response. He whispered, "Dad," again, but the man just stood there staring intently. The man stood there for several more moments before removing his hat in a bow and walking from the doorway. My brother then fell asleep, awaking the next morning to find him gone. My brother asked my dad if he had come to check on him, and my dad said no. I saw the worry in my brother's eyes and asked him why he suddenly was worried. He explained what he saw, and I froze in my seat. That was the same man I saw in exact detail. Yet Ethan had seen something I didn't. The man moved. I knew then that it couldn't have been a coincidence we both saw him. That was the only time my brother ever spotted the man. But for me, it was not a rarity. Every few months I would awake to see him again, and all he ever did was stop and stare. I was scared, but not terrified. I don't think I was afraid of him hurting me, but afraid of the fact I was seeing a ghost. He stared, and it was uncomfortable, but it wasn't in malice. He looked intrigued, as if he were a scientist, and I was his specimen. I grew to get used to this man and the feeling he gave me, but then I discovered he wasn't the only one watching. I was talking of the man one morning when my mother interrupted my story to tell me there was another. This was a few years into living in that home, and it was the first time she had mentioned that she saw anything, as she had always told me I was imagining things. I asked what she meant by this, and she said she saw them almost every night. I implored what she meant by them, and she told me there was also a woman. My mother would wake up in the middle of the night to find a man and a woman standing beside her bed, staring. My mother, unlike myself, was not afraid of them. She would try to talk to them, say hello, but all they ever did was stare. After a few moments of staring, the two would walk around the bed and walk straight out the sliding glass door. When they left the room, they were floating mere inches above the ground, then going through the glass as if it were an open door before looking back at my mother. Their eyes met as they vanished from sight. Her description of the man was exactly how my brother and I described him, but the girl was different. This woman was wearing Victorian-style clothing, unlike the man who was wearing modern. The woman would smile at my mother in a loving way, as the man had a plain face, blank of all emotion. In the many years that we lived there, my mother was the only one to ever see that woman. My dad felt the staring eyes, but never once saw a ghost himself, not truly believing there were ghosts at all. Yet, how can you explain all three of us seeing the same man? It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be. For a while, things were good. We accepted the ghosts and moved on. But that was not all we felt. There was something more demonic in that house. We all tried to ignore it, but ignoring it just pissed the thing off more. Within the closet between me and my brother's room was a hole where the wall had never been finished. This hole went deep into the bowels of the house. Looking down into it, you were met with darkness, complete and utter darkness. This darkness was not nerve-wracking, but fear-inducing. It felt off, like something was waiting inside to hurt you. Like if you looked down into the wall, a face would be staring back up at you, smiling. My brother and I avoided going into the closet as much as we could, because the feeling it gave us made us shiver. We would always lock the doors to the closet in fear of whatever was in that wall. Yet ignoring it was a wrong move. The second we began locking the doors, my brother started having night terrors. Every night he would wake up screaming as if someone or something was torturing him. He would sleepwalk around the house just as often as if he were a puppet on strings. Night terrors and sleepwalking aren't that weird, but before moving into that house, he not once had issues sleeping. Not only that, he would wake up in the middle of the night and stare at the closet door, a terrible feeling creeping over him as if something was on the other side, waiting to pounce. This feeling wasn't like the other ghosts we saw. The man and woman stared from afar, but never intervened. They weren't malice in nature, but silent watchers. Whatever this was, wanted to hurt us. It didn't just affect my brother, but the house as a whole. One winter, the snow melted and dropped through the ceiling and wall. My mom decided to tear open the front wall to see what the extent of the damage truly was. She hired a crew to fix whatever had been done. One of their crew members stood in front of the wall and took a sledgehammer to it. The second the wall gave way, all hell broke loose as thousands of hornets came flying out at him. The crew ran around screaming as the hornets, now angry, attacked and stung them wherever they could. The crew managed to get one of the doors open and ran out into the yard, crying in pain. My neighbor called up my mother to tell her about the crew crying on our lawn. When she arrived, the workers led her into the living room where they had broken the hole in the wall. She was met with something she never expected. Within the wall, she found a ginormous beehive, 12 feet high by 7 feet wide. Yet there was no explanation as to how it got there, because as far as they could tell, there were no holes the hornets could have gotten through. This could have just been a coincidence of hornets getting through the siding and building within our wall. But the immense size was terrifying. How had we never heard buzzing? Maybe it was just nature. But deep down, I don't think it was. We dealt with these happenings for a few more years before finally getting out. We moved into a new house that used to be owned by a priest. I could instantly tell that this house was clear of ghosts. No feeling of being watched or weird happenings occurred since we moved in. A few years later, I decided to pay for a website that looked for deaths on the property of your home. I wanted to know if I could explain what happened to me and who the staring man was. Luckily, they had the answer I so dearly wanted. One man had died in my home from a heart attack on the second floor. A small photo appeared on the screen, and I recognized him instantly. I could never forget those piercing eyes. Sadly, the record showed no mention of the woman or what that demonic force could be, but the house had been moved from a different area, so it's possible she died in that other location. Her clothes made it seem like she had been dead a lot longer than the man had, meaning there might not be a record of her death at all. And whether that more demonic force we felt was one of them or something much darker, I do not know. I still dream of the ghosts from time to time. I wonder if the new residents have felt them. Yet I am glad we moved out. At least now, when I am home on my own, I am finally alone.